Welcome into another edition of the Old North State Sports Show, folks. Super Bowl is done all over. If you've not had a chance to listen to the post Super Bowl episode, which was really short, it's available now, but we're officially in off-season mode, folks. It is here, which means, hey, news is going to start flying in. We are a month away from legal tampering. So in a month, we should have a general idea of some of the free agents that may be coming into Carolina, as well as some guys that may be out the door. Lots to digest as we get there. But today, tell you what, man, I sit out a day from recording, and then we go out into the Panthers verse. And we have beef with Steve Smith Sr., a few others, Charles Johnson, beefing with Cam Newton and some comments that he made. We're going to talk about it today. And to be honest, I don't really care on either side of the party. We'll get into it when we get there. But before we do that, new kicker in Carolina. Folks, this may officially be the end of Eddie Pinheiro, which I know to some, maybe to most, that's a good thing for you. But it sounds like Eddie Pinheiro may be out the door based on the addition of a new kicker, a kicker that's actually been here. He served as a backup for Eddie when Eddie went out for one game. Spent a little bit of time here, and then he's bounced all around the NFL this season. The 49ers, Titans, there's one other team. I just had his stats pulled up. But anyways, he's bounced around, and that is Matthew Wright. Let's go ahead and jump into it. But before we do, Panthers fans, college football fans, and more, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps me out. Matthew Wright, new kicker in Carolina, folks. It's happened. Now, it's a little early. I don't think he's the solidified number one kicker. I do think there's still going to be a competition, but I think this eases the burden for the Panthers. You now could negotiate with Eddie Pinheiro if you can come to terms, or you may look at this as an opportunity to say, well, we view Matthew Wright as the same level of kicker as we have in Eddie Pinheiro. We're going to get him for much cheaper. We're going to let Eddie Pinheiro walk, and he can go get paid wherever he wants, and we both move on. We're both happy. That seems like the most likely scenario. I still don't rule out either an undrafted free agent or potentially the Panthers have 11 draft picks as it is today. Those late 5th, 6th round picks honestly aren't going to mean too much. 7th round pick, maybe it's time to give one of those up. Draft a kicker, draft a punter, hopefully not draft a long snapper. Don't pull a Matt Rule, but we'll find out soon enough. But yeah, I mean, speaking of competition, I thought it would be important to take a look at the stats of these guys. Comparing Matthew Wright and Eddie Pinheiro. So this is their 2024 season. Combine everything. 93.8% field goal percentage for Matthew Wright, which tied for 7th. He's 100% on his extra points. Longest made field goal was 50 yards and a total of 51 points scored. He was 15 of 16 on field goals. The one miss, I believe, was about a 59-yard attempt, and then he was 6 of 6 on his extra points. Eddie Pinheiro, very familiar face with the Carolina Panthers fans, 84.6% field goal percentage, which was 25th, 94.3% extra points made, or on his extra point made, which is 29th, and his longest attempt was 53 yards, so tied for 31st, 29th. Not getting much more length when it comes to Matthew Wright right now, but maybe a little more consistency and 99 points scored. So, again, Matthew Wright bounced around. 15 of 16, 6 of 6. Eddie Pinheiro was 22 of 26 field goal-wise and 33 for 35 on his extra point attempts. And, I mean, we knew there's likely going to be some shakeups on the special teams unit with Eddie being a free agent, with Johnny Hekker being a free agent, with J.J. Jansen. It seems like Jansen's probably the most likely to come back. I still don't know that Johnny Hekker will be on this roster heading into next year. Great guy, great punter, great teammate. Kind of lost it a little bit. Not all the way. Still a really good kicker. Really good at pinning folks down inside the 20. But just looking at the state of the Carolina Panthers, could be an opportunity for them to go ahead and move on. And last year, you didn't have the change that some people wanted, primarily in kicker, in my opinion, because you have a brand new head coach. And I think it was a little bit of a gamble to go with Harrison Mevis at that time. Just wasn't the right time. Speaking of all this special teams talk, let's take a trip up north. And our good old buddy Chris Tabor, he is headed to Buffalo Bills. You got a good one. I know there's some people here in Carolina that may or may not like him. I think he was a great special teams coach. He coached this unit up perfectly. But you can see here, Adam Schefter reports that Bills are hiring former Panthers interim head coach and special teams coordinator as a special team coordinator. He spent last season out of the NFL getting his return. Really good special teams guy. I despise our special teams unit. I know there's some folks that talk about special teams. I talk about it every week. There's three phases to the game of football: special teams, offense, and defense. Our special teams unit, and yes, when you get down to a fourth string, a third string, whoever, kind of doesn't help, but we just are not a well-coached unit, in my opinion, in the Carolina Panthers. I really wanted a change for the special teams coordinator. I wanted him out. It didn't happen, so we'll take it with what we can get. But yeah, congrats to Tabor. And man, the Buffalo Bills continue to be the Carolina Panthers North. All I ask is, if y'all are going to do this, and technically we brought a few guys down from y'all now. If you're going to do this, send us some wins, like in exchange. Just send us some good vibes or something that'll help this franchise get back on track. So that is not the only coach, former Panthers coach, that is making a change and getting hired. Nate Carroll headed to Vegas with, of course, his dad. Both of the Carroll sons, both the Pete Carroll sons, are going to be coaching. Nate Carroll headed as what I believe is going to be the assistant quarterbacks coach. So he was the pass game coordinator. Just didn't work out here. I feel like the only reason that he was hired here in Carolina was because of the connection to his dad. I feel like Dave Canales was like, yeah, you know what? I'll do you a favor. I'll hire your son. We all know that Dave Canales was talking to Pete Carroll throughout the season. It's one of the voices and mentors that he leaned into. It's no surprise that, like, coming into this, he was, hey, yeah, I'll hire your son. But there you go. Updates on that side of the ball, so to speak. And you know what? This one I didn't throw in the caption, but I thought it would be worth sharing. Super Bowl viewership, and I think there's a new number out at 127 million. Either way, 126 million projected average audience for the Super Bowl across all these networks. A new record high for viewership. Record high, 35.7 million viewers was the peak audience from 8 to 8:15 in the second quarter. Record high in streaming via the digital properties that they offer. I mean, this was off the charts. The only reason that I am putting this on there is the number of people that said they were not going to watch the Super Bowl. So many people said, oh, I'm not watching the Super Bowl this year. I'm not going to do it. And I know there's a good amount of people that didn't, but still, that's a huge number. And to think that it was a blowout, like I even said during the game, this is probably a nightmare for Fox because it is a blowout. Also, it's a nightmare because you have Tom Brady instead of Greg Olsen calling the game, but it is what it is. But you have a blowout. And so you would think that viewership would dip, but I think the halftime show, whether you liked it or not, and just the fact that I think maybe the people wanted to see the Chiefs just get demolished and knocked off. Like, I mean, that's what you think about it. The bad guy, the Patriots teams of years past. And I listened to WFNZ today. They played a clip of a New England sports radio show that was just relishing in the moment of this Super Bowl and how fantastic it was to see the Kansas City Chiefs get beat down the way they did. But I'm going to tell you what, man, I think Kansas City's going to be okay. You look at their quarterback. I know they have some questions about Kelsey coming back. That's a good football team. I mean, what happened with the Eagles, I think that's probably the bigger story. The fact that the Eagles have this young core defense, that's something the Panthers have to figure out. And they drafted all these guys from Georgia. It's like you talk about relationships on the map, Georgia North almost. Anyways, let's get back on track and let's talk about probably the biggest story that happened yesterday. People are all over it today. And I got to tell you, before we get into it, I guess we'll pull up the screen. Before we get into this, I am just not a fan of getting into these types of discussions. I'm very black and white when it comes to what I want to discuss. Factual things, not things around speculation or drama or beef or anything to that extent. Like, it's just not what I like to talk about. I like to give people an honest opinion with honest information. And I know people eat up drama. That's what sells. That's why there's Hollywood. People want to see this stuff, but I don't. And I honestly don't care. Either side, whether you're a fan of Steve Smith Sr., a fan of Cam Newton, whatever your stance is on the situation, it's just like I could care less, to be honest. But because, I make Panthers content, I feel like I have to do this. This is almost similar to when Cam Newton was getting into fights at the 7-on-7 camps. And I don't get into that stuff. I just don't. Like, I'm here for football. But you know what? We're going to do it. We're going to talk about it. I'm going to give you my opinion. So Cam Newton hopped on the Travis Hunter's show and dropped a gem about being the number one pick. We've got the audio. Now, we are playing the audio that came directly from this smaller version. There is more context. It doesn't change what Cam said that much. You can go out and view and listen to that. But let's run this back. I'm going to pause myself so that you don't hear me, and then we'll play this.
I was the first pick. I went into a locker room of losers.
How did you handle the pressure of being the top pick?
Let's put it in perspective. You're the top pick because what?
Leave play.
No. You're looking at it from a personal situation. I'm talking about from the professional situation. You're the top pick because that was the worst team in the NFL the year before. For me, I wanted to be the number one pick. You could potentially be the first pick, but bro, you have no way of impacting the game like a quarterback does. You can lock down the number one receiver. You can make impact plays on offense all you want, but it's still not like a quarterback. My issue is when I was the first pick, I went into a locker room of losers. Guys didn't know how to win. Guys didn't know how to prepare. It was a culture shock for me. The game.
So that really is the clip. What made Steve Smith Sr. and Charles Johnson so mad is the statement around going into a locker room full of losers. And for context, yes. I mean, when you think about being or walking into a situation as the number one overall pick, you are going to a team that has a bad record. Unless you have a situation like the Panthers when they traded up, coming off of 7 wins, or whatever situation where a team has traded up and maybe they're not the actual worst team in the NFL. 90% of the time, 95% of the time, even in cases where teams are trading up, you go into a very bad football team, no doubt. That's the reason they're picking as high as they are. Carolina Panthers are coming off a terrible season at 2-14. It was the Jimmy Clausen years. It was the worst offense in Panthers history. Do we need to go into more detail? Maybe, maybe not. But the year before that, it was like a 12-win football team. So you go there to say this was a team full of losers. They didn't know how to win. They didn't have the culture. I understand. Like, we can go up here and pull up Steve Smith. 53-man locker room, -1 equals 52 losers. And he said, wow, breaking news to 89. And yes, there were some really good football players on the team. At the time that Cam was drafted, Steve Smith Sr.'s on there. There was others that were added after via trade, but in general, there were some decent football players. And I think of this as like, man, to get into the NFL alone, the talent that it takes to be there, it's hard to say these guys are losers. And he kind of put it as these guys were here to collect a paycheck. But underneath this, you see another tweet from Steve Smith Sr. He said, "I've walked and listened from afar as you, Cameron Newton, talk about Panthers. None of us are perfect. Yes, we were 2-14 before you blessed us with your presence. The way you have talked about the Panthers lately, I'm very disappointed. I wish you nothing but the best." He said, "I'm done. Peace out emoji." Done. So are you done as a Panthers fan? I see it. The way I look at this is Cam Newton, no matter what he says, is going to go viral. And I also think about Steve Smith Sr., and I know he works for the NFL Network, but he also does some work directly for the Panthers. And his tie with the Panthers is very similar to Jake Delhomme's, to Luke Kuechly's. The guys that work for the team are going to have a different perspective. It's their employer, partially their employer for whatever amount of time out of the year. They're in the building. I know Steve Smith Sr. is not in the building as much because he talked about that back when Bryce Young was benched. He stays away from it. He's not as intertwined as Jake Delhomme or Luke Kuechly or whoever else is in and around. Thomas Davis even. He's a little bit closer. Cameron Newton's nowhere near the Panthers. We know that. He has not been here like in the Panthers, and we just went through the whole debacle about him complaining about not having his face and name on the wall and everything, and not officially being retired, all that goes with that. I think people overreact in a lot of situations, and the first thing to do is to pick up the phone to tweet whatever it is you want to tweet. That's just the day and age that we live in. I don't know, the odds of them being able to talk it out, but I also don't think when Cam went into this, I don't think he was necessarily, this is just me saying the players themselves were losers. That's my take. You can have a different opinion. I think he's saying they were losing and had lost, and they were accustomed to losing. And so if you're trying to help prepare someone who's going to be taken over, I mean, you want them to know, like, yeah, you're walking into a bad situation. There's a reason, whatever happened, that this team is trying to figure it out. So I think there is some truth to that. Now, does that mean every single player that was on the roster is completely garbage? No, not at all. Maybe he could have worded it a little bit differently. Maybe he could have explained it. But I don't know that that's him. I mean, he can go on any platform he wants now, all over ESPN, First Take, his own podcast, and whatever he says is going to go viral. And to be honest, he's a little, in my opinion, bigger than the Panthers brand itself right now. That's why I think it would be beneficial for him and the Panthers to reconcile, to, have more, have a better standing and be able to utilize him as a voice and former Panther player. But anyways, folks, that is all that I have for today. I appreciate y'all tuning in. Let me know what y'all think. This is Carolina Dad. Y'all have a good one.